Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue our unit talking about ecology. Today we're talking about something known as symbiotic relationships. So let's go ahead and get started and see what we're talking about today. So what is a symbiotic relationship? A symbiotic relationship is a relationship between two organisms of different species that is long-term. And then depending on the specifics of the relationship, we will then classify it into one of the following. So one type of symbiotic relationship is called mutualism. In mutualism, this is a relationship where both organisms benefit. So a win-win situation. And I'll give you examples of these here in just a moment. Another type of symbiotic relationship is called parasitism. What's that? Well, in this type of relationship, this is where one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. So this would be a win-lose situation. And then the last type of symbiotic relationship that we'll talk about is called commensalism. This is a relationship where one organism benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefits from the relationship. So they can be good, they can be a win-win situation, and then they can be bad for organisms sometimes as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple different examples of these types of relationships. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about is mutualism. In this type of relationship, both species benefits from the interaction with the other one. Here are some examples of this type of relationship. So the nutrient exchange between vascular plants and nitrogen-fixing bacteria. In this situation, these organisms team up and help each other out. We talked about last time how nitrogen is very hard for plants to find sometimes because only certain things can fix it and make it into a form that plants can use. Well, if a vascular plant and nitrogen-fixing bacteria team up, then both of them are going to benefit from this relationship because the plants are going to get the nitrogen that they need and the bacteria are going to live off of the products of the plant's photosynthesis. So the bacteria gets free food and the plant gets free nitrogen. It's a win-win situation. Another example of mutualism is the fertilization between flowering plants and pollinators. And I'll show you a picture of this here in just a second, but you've probably seen pollinators flying from one flower to the next and they're hopping around and they're getting that nectar out of the flowers. You maybe have seen honeybees do this or hummingbirds do it as well. Well, this is a win-win situation for these organisms because the bees and the honeybird get the nectar that they want. They eat that nectar and the bees use it to make honey, so they're getting food out of it. But it's good for the plants as well because as the bee flies from one plant to the next, it's spreading the pollen around and helping to fertilize the different plants. So that's another win-win situation. Another example of this is plants using fruits and edible seeds to encourage animal seed dispersal. So think about an apple tree, for example. You've probably heard a saying about this type of plant, and it's something like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, think about that for a second. Let's say the apples are falling right next to the trees. That means that the tree isn't really going to spread out that much, right? Because all the seeds are in the fruit and the fruit's falling down underneath the tree. That means that the seeds can't really move around very much. But the reason that you find the seeds in the fruits is because an animal might walk up, eat that fruit, and then walk off further into the woods, and then when it gets rid of the excess of what it ate, the seeds will often be intact, and that's how the animals can spread the seeds around throughout the forest for the tree. So that's another win-win situation. There's more specific examples of this mutualism as well. There's a type of fish called a goby fish, and it teams up with a shrimp. I'll tell you about that in just a second. And then another good example of this mutualistic relationship is a clownfish and sea anemones. And if you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo, you would know a little bit about that. So let's take a look at some pictures of different examples of this mutualism. So this is the first one that I was talking about. Sometimes plants and nitrogen-fixing bacteria team up. This is a win-win situation because the plants are getting the nitrogen compounds that they need and the bacteria are getting the photosynthetic products that they need. So it's a win-win. They team up and both sides, both organisms get something out of it. Okay, another example, this is a bee covered in honey. So you've probably seen bees flying around from flower to flower. They go into the flower, they get the nectar out of the flower. That's what they're using to make honey. But as they do that, as they're crawling down into the flower to get the nectar, they get covered in the pollen. The pollen will stick to its fuzzy exterior, and this, you can see in this picture that this bee is covered in pollen. When that bee flies to the next flower to get more nectar, it'll spread the pollen around, and that's how flowers pollinate. They'll fertilize by using these pollinators. Okay, I wanted to talk about this shrimp and the goji fish. The shrimp is kind of hard to see, it's down towards the bottom there, but the two fish are called goby fish, and these organisms team up sometimes. What's going on is that the shrimp is really good at digging out these little burrows. You can see the little burrow behind it is just a hole in the ground back there. So the shrimp will get down into the sea floor and start digging this burrow out. It's really good. It can use its claws and move rocks and dig out and make a hiding spot. So the goji fish, the goby fish, and the shrimp all hide in this little shelter that the shrimp has made. Now, the reason that they team up is that the shrimp does not have very good vision. The goby fish has really, really good vision. So what's happening is while the shrimp is digging out the cave, the goby fish keep watch, and they'll keep an eye out, and if a predator gets by, it'll let the shrimp know by touching it with its tail, and then they all hide down there in the little thing that it's dug out. So they team up. It's a win-win relationship. The shrimp is really good at digging but can't see the predators. The goby fish can't dig because it has fins, but it has really good eyesight. So they team up to stay safe from predators. Okay, and then I think I have one more here. So yeah, this is a clownfish and a sea anemone. These sea anemones sting. Most fish that come by it would not be able to live in and around this sea anemone. The clownfish has mucus on the outside of its body that helps protect it from the sea anemone's stings. And so the reason that this is a win-win relationship, the clownfish stays safe in the sea anemone because things can't swim around the anemone without getting stung, and then the clownfish will scare off other fish that eat the sea anemone. So it's a win-win relationship. They protect each other from their predators, and then they don't hurt each other. So those are a couple of examples of mutualism, how these organisms that are of different species can team up and find a win-win relationship. So let's look at a couple of these other types of relationships. Okay, another one is parasitism. This is one that most people tend to have a better understanding of. And this type of relationship, one of the species is going to benefit from the interaction while one is harmed, but usually not killed right away. Some examples of these are lice, mosquitoes, vampire bats. You could say ticks are another example of parasitism, and then many single-celled protozoans that cause sickness such as malaria, sleeping sickness, and dysentery. So usually what's going on here is that one organism is feeding off of another one, but not outright killing it. And so some really good examples of this are the vampire bat and the mosquito. We live in Mississippi, we all know about mosquitoes. They'll come up, they'll sting you, they'll feed off of your blood, but they don't kill you right away so that they can come back to you and keep feeding off of you. So that's what parasitism is one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. Okay, so let's talk about the last type of symbiotic relationship, and this is called commensalism. In commensalism, this is a type of relationship. One of the species benefits from the interaction while the other is neither harmed nor benefits from it. So it's one benefits and one doesn't get anything out of it. Here are some examples. You've probably seen remora fish swimming on and around sharks. You can have these things called cattle egrets that eat the insects stirred up by the cattle, and there's a type of plant called a burdock plant, and it has these spiny seeds that cling to the fur of mammals. So let's take a look at a couple of those. So on the left over there, we have these remora fish. They have this weird looking head that lets them snatch on to bigger fish. What happens is as that shark's swimming around, if it finds something to eat, it'll start to eat it, and what will happen is that there's a lot of scraps just floating around in the water. At that point, the remora fish detaches from itself and starts to eat the debris left in the water. And then when it's done, it just attaches itself back to the shark. This is commensalism because although these remoras attach themselves to the shark, it's not really hurting it and not harming its ability to hunt. This picture makes the remora and the shark look similar size, but the remora are actually much smaller than the shark, so the shark usually doesn't get bothered by it. On the right over there, that's the cattle egret, that bird sitting on top of the cattle there. What happens is the cattle egrets, the bird, they eat insects. And what happens is as the cattle is walking around the field eating grass, it stirs up a lot of insects. When that happens, the cattle egret flies off of the cattle and starts to eat all of those insects, and they just kind of wait around for the cattle to stir up more insects. And again, you can see that that bird is so tiny that it's not really hurting the cattle at all. And so this is a relationship where one organism is benefiting by eating the food that's around the bigger organism, and then the other one is not harmed, usually because they're so big they can't really notice the other one. So those are a couple of different types of symbiotic relationships I wanted to cover with you. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.